December 2015. Inside FBI headquarters, a senior official updates the Bureau's most sacred list. A name is coming off. No arrest, shootout, or body. Just a quiet deletion. For only the 7th time in 65 years, a top 10 most wanted fugitive is being removed without being caught. The same agency that hunted Osama bin Laden across continents, that dismantled New York's 5 families, is surrendering. The memo lands with bureaucratic calm. Subject resides in a country with no U.S. extradition treaty. The translation? We cannot get him. And here's the most unsettling part. He's not hiding in a bunker or a jungle. He's sipping champagne in a Moscow suburb, protected by Vladimir Putin himself. The FBI built a 45-count indictment, exposed a fake billion-dollar magnet company, tracked shell companies from Budapest to the Cayman Islands. Years of work, witnesses who risked their lives, and none of it mattered. The white whale swims free. What kind of man makes the FBI surrender? And how did a stocky Ukrainian con artist become untouchable to the most powerful nation on Earth? May 13th, 1998. Newtown, Pennsylvania. 47 FBI agents in tactical gear surround an unremarkable industrial building on a quiet street, headquarters of a company called YBM Magnex International. On paper, YBM is a Wall Street fairy tale, a publicly traded magnet manufacturer valued at nearly $1 billion on the Toronto Stock Exchange. The stock has climbed 300% in 2 years. Pension funds in Canada bought in. Day traders in New York chased the momentum. Teachers, firefighters, retirees across North America flooded their savings into this wonder stock. The company's world headquarters sits right here in Bucks County, and the FBI has spent 26 months building a case to tear it apart. A command crackles over the radio. Flashbangs detonate. Agents breach the doors and sweep through offices with weapons raised. They expect to find a bustling manufacturing floor churning out industrial magnets for hard drives and MRI machines. Instead, they find silence. A cavernous warehouse of idle machinery. Fluorescent lights flicker over an assembly line that has never assembled anything. The machines are there, gleaming and expensive, but they are props staged for investor tours. The finished products lining the shelves are dummy samples, magnets purchased from legitimate suppliers and repackaged with YBM labels. YBM Magnex International is not making anything at all. Documents cover every surface: purchase orders, invoices, technical drawings, mountains of paperwork that look perfectly legitimate. The entire enterprise is a theater. By the time trading is halted, the scam has vaporized more than $150 million of investors' money. FBI forensic accountants pick apart the fraud. Money cycled through bank accounts from Budapest to the Caribbean, reported as magnet sales that never occurred. One of the largest financial crimes in North American history. Yet the Bureau remains unsatisfied. If this was a pump and dump scheme, who was the mastermind? Who cashes out $150 million and leaves behind a fake magnet factory as a calling card? Agents trace the web of shell companies and find an unexpected name at the center: Semion Mogilevich. Ukrainian-born, 51 years old, economics degree from Lviv University, a ghost with no U.S. presence, white-collar con artist, rogue financier. As they dig deeper, a chilling realization appears. He is far more than a clever fraudster. He is what organized crime experts coldly call a global player. Less gently, he is the boss of bosses of the Russian mafia. The FBI's routine fraud case just exploded into something much bigger. But why would a crime lord running weapons, drugs, and trafficking operations bother with a magnet company in suburban Pennsylvania? A federal grand jury in the Eastern District of Pennsylvania indicted Semion Mogilevich on 45 counts: racketeering conspiracy, securities fraud, wire fraud, mail fraud, and money laundering. Prosecutors assemble a dossier spanning thousands of pages. Witnesses who risked their lives to testify. Paper trails tracing millions through banks in Budapest, Vienna, Cyprus, and the Cayman Islands. By 2003, they have assembled what should be an airtight case, everything needed to put Mogilevich away for the rest of his natural life. Everything except Semion Mogilevich himself. In all his years of masterminding this massive fraud, he never set foot on American soil. Not once. Every fax from YBM's Pennsylvania office routed through Budapest. Every phone call with executives was placed from Hungary or Russia. Every wire transfer orchestrated from abroad like a phantom conductor directing an orchestra he never joined. The Bureau has a 45-count indictment with his name on it, but they cannot slap handcuffs on a ghost who exists only as a signature on shell company documents. To prosecute him in a U.S. court, they need to physically get him into the United States. Extradition becomes their only hope, and that hope, as the FBI is about to learn, is fading by the minute. The agents thought they had caught a formidable fraudster. Instead, they have uncovered a shadow boss of international crime operating oceans away, beyond their reach. How do you catch a man who lives in a world without borders? And what made a crime lord whose empire spans continents decide to target American retirees' pension funds? Mogilevich's criminal empire did not start with billion-dollar frauds. It started with an old-school con in the 1970s Soviet Union, in the city of Lviv, Ukraine. Young Semion, a stocky economics student with thick glasses and a gift for numbers, preyed on his own community. Jewish families desperate to emigrate to Israel or the West needed to liquidate their assets before the Soviet government would let them leave. Mogilevich offered to help, promising to sell their apartments, furniture, and heirlooms for fair market prices and wire them the proceeds once they arrived abroad. They trusted him. They handed him keys, deeds, and their life savings. Mogilevich pocketed everything. When those families arrived in Vienna or Tel Aviv with nothing but the clothes on their backs, they had no recourse. Many eventually settled in Brighton Beach, Brooklyn, forming the nucleus of what would become New York's Russian mob. Some remembered Mogilevich. Some would work for him later. He served 2 short prison stints in the Soviet Union for fraud and currency speculation, emerging each time with money, underworld contacts, and a hardened philosophy. Victims do not matter. Only power does. The scam was small, but the lesson was permanent. By the late 1980s, as the Soviet Union began its final collapse, Mogilevich saw his moment. He left Ukraine and relocated to Budapest, Hungary, a neutral crossroads between East and West where intelligence agencies, arms dealers, and criminals all converged in the chaos. There, he built his own syndicate from scratch, one that would operate on a different level than the street gangs and extortion rackets that defined organized crime. He recruited not just thugs, but ex-KGB officers and Afghanistan war veterans as his enforcers, men who had tortured prisoners in Kabul and felt nothing. These were not bodyguards. They were killers with military training who would not flinch at any order. He would destroy entire rival groups, recalls former mob insider Leonid Roitman, who later testified about Mogilevich's tactics to FBI investigators. First the leaders, then the new leaders who replaced them, until the whole group was gone. Mogilevich did not cut off the head of a rival organization. He burned the roots. Competitors who refused to submit simply vanished. Bodies surfaced in the Danube. By the mid-1990s, he was not just a boss. He was the boss of bosses, a criminal who operated with impunity across a dozen countries, while law enforcement in each one blamed another jurisdiction. But running street rackets was only the beginning. What happens when a man with unlimited violence and unlimited ambition decides to go corporate? His portfolio expanded with terrifying speed. He started with weapons trafficking. Mogilevich's network supplied everything from Kalashnikovs to surface-to-air missiles. Western intelligence services tracked shipments to African warlords and Middle Eastern militias. There were persistent whispers, never fully confirmed, of deals involving nuclear materials from poorly guarded Soviet stockpiles. Then he went with drug trafficking. He controlled heroin routes stretching from the poppy fields of Afghanistan through Turkey to the streets of Western Europe, a pipeline worth billions annually. Human trafficking. His syndicate ran brothels across the Czech Republic, Hungary, and Israel, moving women from impoverished villages in Ukraine and Moldova to serve as prostitutes in foreign cities. Finally, he masterized money laundering. His financial advisors, some with advanced degrees from Moscow's best universities, created Byzantine webs of shell companies to wash dirty money clean through bank accounts stretching from Cyprus to Gibraltar to the Channel Islands. Every new venture added a layer of armor. His wealth ballooned into the billions, making it easy to buy friends and influence. He accumulated at least a dozen known aliases and multiple citizenships. He was Semion Mogilevich Teleš one day, Sergei Schneider the next, Hungarian one week, Israeli the next. He collected passports like other people collect stamps. He moved freely across borders, living in mansions in Budapest and dachas outside Moscow. No single police force could track all his movements. No single charge in one country could stop a man who could vanish into another. In the FBI's Philadelphia office, Special Agent Mike Dixon began to grasp the shadow they were chasing. He's a big man. He's a very powerful man. I think more powerful than a John Gotti could be, because he has the ability to influence nations. Gotti never reached that stature. The American mafia don could bribe judges and sway a borough. Mogilevich could pull levers that affected entire countries. Here is where natural gas appears. By the 2000s, Mogilevich had insinuated himself into Eastern Europe's energy trade. Through proxies, he became a hidden player behind a Swiss-registered firm called Rosukreenergo, the middleman for Russia's natural gas exports to Ukraine and beyond. Russia's gas feeds furnaces and power plants across Europe. Control the gas flow, and you have a chokehold on nations during a winter freeze. Mogilevich did not need to be a politician or a general to wield geopolitical power. He just needed to control a company everyone relied on but few understood. With a phone call, he could turn off the heat in millions of homes. What kind of criminal makes himself essential to a superpower's foreign policy? If you find this story as disturbing as I do, consider subscribing. The more people who understand how men like this operate, the harder it becomes for them to hide. This is the man behind that empty magnet factory in Pennsylvania. A man whose power transcends the underworld and starts to rival legitimate states. The FBI's 45-count indictment now feels like trying to lasso a tornado. Mogilevich's empire is global, diversified, and cloaked behind layers of political protection that no RICO charge can pierce. Standard law enforcement playbooks will not be enough. To catch Mogilevich, they need the cooperation of foreign governments. They need him to slip up and travel somewhere within reach. They need a miracle. So they reach for their biggest lever, international exposure. If Mogilevich cannot be quietly extradited, maybe public pressure will smoke him out. It is time to write Semion Mogilevich's name on the FBI's most infamous bulletin board. But would plastering his face across the world finally force him into the open, or would it reveal something far more troubling about who was protecting him? October 21st, 2009. FBI Headquarters, Washington, D.C. In a wood-paneled conference room, officials finalize a decision that will echo across international law enforcement. The 10 most wanted fugitives list is about to get a new name, one that few Americans can pronounce and fewer have ever heard of. Since J. Edgar Hoover created the list in 1950, it has maintained a 94% capture rate. 463 of 523 people listed have been apprehended or located. The list works because it turns every customs agent, every airline employee, every citizen with a television into a potential informant. When a fugitive goes up to that rogues gallery, the world takes notice. Borders become harder to cross. Airlines flag passports. Tips flood in from every continent. The heat becomes inescapable. Semion Mogilevich's mugshot joins the ranks of notorious outlaws, his balding head and heavy jowls positioned alongside Osama bin Laden's gaunt face on the roster of America's Most Wanted. The Bureau publicizes the $100,000 reward on his head, later raised to $5 million. Press releases emphasize just how dangerous this man is. International con artist, boss of bosses of an Eastern European mafia super network, threat to the global financial system. In law enforcement terms, this is the nuclear option. They are pulling every diplomatic string, activating every partner agency from Interpol to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, deploying every trick in the book to smoke Semion Mogilevich out of whatever shadow he is hiding in. At first, there appeared to be a breakthrough. In January 2008, a year and a half before the top 10 listing, Mogilevich was unexpectedly arrested in Moscow by Russian police at an upscale restaurant. The charge seemed almost comically minor: tax evasion at a chain of cosmetic stores he owned. But there he was, in handcuffs, in custody, on Russian soil. The FBI's hopes surged. Could this be the opening they needed? Would Russia actually cooperate, perhaps in exchange for some diplomatic concession? Agents in Philadelphia and Washington knew it was a long shot. Russia had never shown any interest in helping America prosecute Mogilevich. But the mere fact that he was behind bars in a Moscow detention center was encouraging. Maybe the years of pressure, the Interpol red notices, the diplomatic cables were finally working. 18 months later, those hopes were brutally dashed. In July 2009, a Moscow court quietly orders Mogilevich released from jail. The official reason borders on absurd. A Russian Interior Ministry spokeswoman explains that the charges are not of a particularly grave nature, so investigators had no particular reason to keep him imprisoned. Not grave. The man the FBI suspects of trafficking guns, drugs, humans, and possibly nuclear material. The man whose fraud robbed North Americans of $150 million. Released because Russian authorities classified his case as no big deal. Mogilevich posts bail and walks out the door. Free. The FBI realizes something terrifying. Mogilevich is not just hiding in Russia. He is being sheltered. The top 10 listing, the publicity, none of it made a dent. Moscow either does not get the memo or does not care. The very next month, as the FBI is adding him to the most wanted list with great fanfare, Mogilevich is reportedly settling back into life in Moscow, dining at upscale restaurants as if nothing happened. International pressure was supposed to make him persona non grata. Instead, it barely ruffled his feathers. Inside the FBI, frustration gives way to cold realization. The usual formula, making the world too hot for the fugitive to hide, is not working. Mogilevich's name on a wanted poster does not scare a government that willingly set him free. Why would Russia protect a mob boss? Why thumb its nose at a US indictment and an Interpol red notice for this man? The answer has nothing to do with lack of evidence or lack of effort. It has everything to do with power. What did Mogilevich give the Kremlin that made him worth protecting from the full weight of American justice? To understand the invisible barrier the FBI keeps slamming against, consider the timing of Mogilevich's rise. He built his empire in the 1990s, the wildest and most lawless decade in modern Russian history. The Soviet Union had just collapsed. State assets worth hundreds of billions were being privatized, often to whoever had the cash or the connections to grab them. Organized crime groups and former KGB officers were indistinguishable in many cases. And in St. Petersburg, a mid-level ex-KGB officer named Vladimir Putin was serving as deputy mayor, cutting deals with businessmen of questionable background, getting a crash course in how organized crime could intertwine with politics, commerce, and state power. Putin's later rise would be built partly on mastering that gray zone. Mogilevich, with his immense wealth, his international banking networks, and his ability to move money and goods across any border without attracting attention, was exactly the kind of figure who could prove useful to ambitious men in that world. He was not a patriot. He was not an ideologue. He was a tool, a very expensive, very effective tool that could be deployed when the state needed things done that the state could never officially do. Years later, curious evidence of that utility emerged. In 1999, a Ukrainian presidential bodyguard named Mykola Melnichenko began making secret recordings of President Leonid Kuchma's private conversations. The tapes, later authenticated by US intelligence, captured hundreds of hours of candid discussions. In one leaked snippet, a voice identified as Kuchma casually mentions that Mogilevich has a good relationship with Putin. The implication was clear. This was not just street gossip. This was coming from a head of state who would know. Around the same time, ex-FSB agent Alexander Litvinenko, who had defected to Britain and was cooperating with British intelligence, made claims that Mogilevich had been an informant and asset for the KGB since the 1980s, continuing his relationship with its successor agency, the FSB. Litvinenko was poisoned with polonium-210 in London in November 2006, almost certainly on Kremlin orders, which lent a grim credibility to his accusations. Ukrainian intelligence chief Ihor Smeshko independently reported to U.S. officials that Mogilevich enjoyed protection at the highest levels in Moscow, effectively operating as an instrument of Russian security services when needed. Mogilevich was not just a mafia boss doing his own thing. He was entwined with the Russian state. By the 2000s, as Putin consolidated power and became Russia's president, Mogilevich moved openly about Moscow. He bought a lavish dacha in an elite suburb. He dined at high-end restaurants. He appeared to fear no Russian law enforcement. If he had been a valuable resource to Russian intelligence, someone who could facilitate the laundering of billions through offshore accounts, or broker illicit arms deals the Kremlin wanted deniability on, or manage that critical gas trade, then turning him over to the Americans would be out of the question. The gas angle exemplifies how Mogilevich made himself untouchable by making himself useful. Through Rosukrenergo, he had indirect control over a significant slice of Russia's energy exports. That gave him leverage not just over gangsters or businessmen, but over governments. The Kremlin could use Rosukrenergo as a lever in negotiations with Ukraine, and Mogilevich's cut kept him rich and loyal. A U.S. diplomatic cable later revealed that the Ukrainian oligarch nominally running Rosukrenergo, Dmytro Firtash, admitted privately that he needed Mogilevich's approval to operate. Mogilevich was literally a gatekeeper in the energy sector. In Putin's Russia, if you help the state project power or make money, and ideally do both, you become part of the club. Mogilevich delivered on both counts. Picture the scene from the perspective of an FBI agent in 2010 trying to strategize the capture of Semion Mogilevich. Extradition treaty with Russia? None. Russia's constitution forbids handing over its citizens, and Mogilevich now holds Russian citizenship. Secret snatch operation on foreign soil? That would be an act of war if attempted in Moscow. Lure him out? They tried that with the most wanted list, hoping he would slip up and travel. He did not. The man is comfortable, protected by Russian security services. An Interpol notice is just a piece of paper to a man who sits under the Kremlin's umbrella. The FBI keeps Mogilevich on the top 10 list for 6 years, hoping against hope. They chase down rumors and whisperings, a sighting in a Moscow cafe here, an unconfirmed trip to Hungary there, but nothing pans out. Mogilevich is not like other fugitives who stay on the list for decades while hiding in a jungle or a mountain. He is hiding in plain sight under the protection of a major world power. Barring a sudden regime change in Moscow or a one-in-a-million deal, there will be no perp walk. By 2015, the FBI's leadership faced a grim choice. Leave Mogilevich on the top 10 list indefinitely as a symbolic gesture, knowing they cannot touch him. Or make a rare and painful exception, acknowledging publicly that this is one fugitive they simply cannot capture. It is an admission no agency ever wants to make, especially not the FBI with its pride on the line. But the truth is inescapable. Mogilevich has engineered immunity to American justice by outsmarting investigators. How does one man outsmart the most powerful nation on Earth? And what happens when the hunters finally admit they have become the hunted? December 2015. A brief press statement crosses the wire services, largely unnoticed amid the holiday bustle of shopping reports and year-end retrospectives. The FBI announces it is removing Semion Mogilevich from the 10 most wanted fugitives list. The wording is dry, almost bureaucratic. Mogilevich is known to be residing in a country that does not extradite to the United States, and he no longer poses an immediate threat to the American public. No fanfare, no press conference, just a quiet deletion and a handful of paragraphs explaining the obvious. Everyone who has been paying attention understands the subtext. The most powerful law enforcement agency on Earth has conceded defeat in the face of immutable geopolitical reality. Mogilevich becomes only the 7th person in 65 years to be removed from the top 10 list without being captured or killed. The FBI spent years and millions of dollars on this case. They proved the crimes. The 45-count indictment still stands. sealed in a filing cabinet in the Eastern District of Pennsylvania, gathering dust. They know exactly who Semion Mogilevich is and what he has done. Defrauded investors of their retirement savings, ordered the deaths of rivals, trafficked women from Ukrainian villages to brothels in Tel Aviv, brokered arms deals to warlords in Africa. They did everything by the book to bring him to justice. None of it mattered, because the book has a last page. American jurisdiction stops at the borders of a sovereign state that refuses to play along, and Russia will never play along. The FBI's addendum that they do not believe Mogilevich poses an immediate threat to the American public rings hollow. It is a face-saving formulation, a way of saying he is not actively defrauding Americans on American soil at this particular moment. The man himself, nearly 70 by then, was living comfortably in Moscow's wealthiest suburbs, a free man. He has never spent a single day in U.S. custody, never seen the inside of an American courtroom, never answered for the devastation of YBM's collapse or any of his other alleged crimes. The investors who lost everything got no justice. The civil settlements from the YBM case, after years of litigation, recovered perhaps 15 cents on the dollar for victims. The witnesses who bravely came forward to testify against one of the world's most dangerous mafia bosses did so at immense personal risk. Some entered witness protection. Some fled their home countries. And ultimately, their testimony led nowhere. FBI agents like Mike Dixon and Peter Cowenhoven, who devoted the prime years of their careers to this case, retired with that one name still nagging at them, the one that got away. Semion Mogilevich celebrates his 79th birthday this year, likely with family and fine champagne, perhaps at an opulent villa outside Moscow, a free man with blood on his hands and money in the bank. The FBI's white whale swims on in waters where they cannot follow. The man who made the FBI surrender is still out there, living proof that if you become valuable enough to the right people, the rules stop applying to you. The FBI's capitulation is not just about Mogilevich. It is a stark admission that there is a limit to what justice can reach when faced with certain realities. It is easy to believe that no one is beyond the law, that given enough time and effort, even the worst criminals will be brought to heel. The story of Semion Mogilevich forces us to confront a far more uncomfortable truth. Above a certain threshold of wealth, power, and political protection, the law is not absolute. Mogilevich found that threshold. He exploited it. He is living proof that sometimes justice for all comes with an asterisk. He is still out there, and his story forces one unsettling question. If one man can place himself above the law by making himself useful to a superpower, how many others might be doing the same right now? You might remember El Chapo, another figure who seemed untouchable for decades. The difference? Mexico eventually broke. Russia never will. And that difference is the reason Semion Mogilevich remains free while El Chapo rots in a Colorado supermax.